Well, good morning, everyone. Depending on where you are, I guess it could be good afternoon or good night. I was in a meeting yesterday with somebody in Singapore, and he's actually in tomorrow, which is just sort of a strange thing for the brain. But anyway, it's morning on the West Coast where we are, and want to welcome you. It's great to be here with you and to have this opportunity to really have an important conversation with some wonderful folks. So my name is Mark Roberts, and I'm the Executive Director of the Max Pree Center for Leadership at Fuller Seminary in Southern California. I'm also sort of the program lead, if you will, for our new initiative focusing on the third of life. And we believe and are really discovering that there is a great opportunity to serve and encourage people who are entering this new and challenging and exciting and confusing season of life. And one of the things that I started doing when we were beginning our third work was I started looking for folks that had done good work. Right? Who could I learn from? Where is their wisdom? And so I think I probably now bought about 20 books on aging or retirement or, third calling, whatever. And I just started working through them. And one of the books that I discovered was a book called Third Calling, What Are You Doing with the Rest of Your Life by Richard and Leona Bergstrom. And I love the book. I loved it because it was very available and personable, because it had really solid biblical theology, because it really showed an awareness of gerontology and the real life issues of people in the third of life. And it just had a great vision. And so I read that book some time ago and loved it. And then as it turned out, in the last few months, Richard and Leona Bergstrom and I started overlapping online. We've never actually met face to face. Maybe that'll happen someday. But and we discovered just a common vision and passion. And they did a webinar in their work a few weeks ago on purpose in the pandemic. And I thought to myself, this is really great. I would love it if they could do that with us, and if we could team up and do it again, and we could share it with some of our people and with others. So that's kind of how we got into this particular event. Richard and Leona are the founders and leaders of a really wonderful work called Reignite, Re-Ignite. And they've got a website with a lot of materials. On that website, you can also get access to the books that they've done, Third Calling, and some other materials. They're just people of great wisdom and commitment. They are people of vision, because they saw that the opportunity to serve folks in the third was coming before many of us got around to that. And so they are really some of the leaders in this field. And I am very pleased and excited to have them with us today. Richard and Leona, thank you. Thank you for your work, and thank you for your friendship and encouragement. Thanks for being available today. I think this is going to be a great session. So I'm going to stop talking so that you can start.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark. And in a moment, I'll put up some PowerPoints to screen share. But I just wanted to say thanks to Mark and the Pree Center of Fuller Seminary for hosting this webinar. And like many of you, our lives have been disrupted by this pandemic, and we've had to adjust our approach to delivering our message and our ministry due to the limitations on travel and gatherings. But it's been a fun journey. So let me bring up a screen share that will be our PowerPoint for today. And so we are Reignite. It's a DBA of our nonprofit, and sponsored, as I said, by Fuller, the Pree Center. So it's been 4 years since we wrote our book, Third Calling, What Are You Doing the Rest of Your Life? And while we've seen a great response to that message, it seems today as if everything has to be filtered through the new realities of the year of 2020, as most of you know. But in the session today, we want to look at the power of purpose in a pandemic. And first of all, look at some of the hopes that we had going into the year, which at the beginning of the year looked a lot different than it does now. then the impact that the extraordinary events of 2020 had on our lives and on yours, and then how we can discover or perhaps rediscover our purpose in the midst of this pandemic. Our desire for you is that you come away from this session with a renewed sense of hope in your journey. So I'm going to turn it over to Leona to review some of those things about the year 2020.
Well, thank you. I want to welcome you as well to this discussion. We all have been on quite a journey these past few months, and it just feels right to come together and talk about it. We want to share with you a little bit of our roller coaster ride, and some of which you will relate to as you consider your own experiences. There are many aspects to our pandemic experiences, but it seems like that scramble to re-envision and reestablish our sense of purpose has been probably the most confounding. Our journey, maybe like yours, has been up and down. Sometimes we feel despair. Other times we feel this strong urge to overcome and follow our calling and mission with heightened determination. Well, we began the year in wide-eyed anticipation for what this new year, with that really cool ring to it, 2020. It was just fun. We wanted to develop a strategic plan for the year. We had a few public engagements and some ideas for expanding our ministry. Kind of strange though, for some reason we didn't come up with that BHAG, that big, hairy, audacious goal that we always try to do every year. In fact, I called it a SHAG. It seemed like more of a simple, humble, achievable goal. And I didn't realize what an understatement that actually was. In one of our newsletters, Reignite puts out a newsletter every month. It was about May, I think. We wrote an article called, "But We Had Hoped." And of course, we were talking a little bit about those gentlemen on the road to Emmaus who were so full of disappointment and were so disheartened because Jesus was crucified. And they said in Luke 24:21, "But we had hoped." Well, those words just rang out in our hearts at the beginning of 2020 or later on in the spring, because we too had hoped. We had hoped for all kinds of things. In fact, let me read to you what I wrote. We had plenty of hopes and plans for 2020, and probably like you, they've been thwarted by COVID-19. We'd hoped to speak at retreats and conferences, travel to Europe, hold author events, and continue thinking and thriving in our ministry of Reignite. Nope. All of our events are canceled. Our book sales have declined, and we are not at all sure what the future holds for Reignite. It was a little dismal blog post there. But yeah, the year had gone awry. Let me give you a little background. On January 10th, Richard turned 70. And we celebrated at an Italian restaurant because we were going to go to Italy that year, right? In fact, we have 3 extra Rick Steves Italy guides if any of you need them, because obviously, with no clue what lay ahead, we canceled that. But we did squeeze in a last possible trip to Hawaii the end of February. And the day we returned was the same day that the first person died of COVID-19 at the Life Care Center in Kirkland, Washington. Interestingly, just a few weeks earlier, on a plane to Denver to help my mom move, I sat next to the VP of Life Care Centers. And we had this wonderful conversation. He was a believer, and we talked about elder care and long life and faith and purpose. We were both quite confident and expectant that his business and our ministry would flourish in 2020. We even discussed some possible partnerships. But that week or so later, February 28th, ended the hopes as Life Care Centers across the region experienced devastating outbreaks of COVID. And then within a matter of days, all of us would be sheltered at home. Richard?
Thank you, Leona. And at that time, the earth tilted on its axis. It was an amazing turn of events. And as I watched things unfold at the Life Care Center, I became increasingly uneasy about going back to church the next Sunday. And so on March the 4th, I wrote a blog called "I'm Thinking About Giving Up Church for Lent." Little did I know that by the next Sunday, March 8th, North Shore Community Church, where I had served for 10 years in Kirkland, canceled its services and went exclusively to streaming, which they had fortunately begun some months earlier. But then March Madness was canceled, then the entire NBA season, and everything else fell like dominoes at that point. Someone has said that the events of 2020 were like having the pandemic of 1918, the Great Depression of the 1930s, and the demonstrations of 1968, all within a 3-month period of time. And that was before the storms that ravaged Iowa, the hurricane that leveled much of Louisiana, and the raging fires out west, which are actually still burning to this day. As Marjorie Worrell writes in the April 20 edition of Forbes magazine, while this crisis has tilted our world on its axis, leaving many feeling ungrounded and off kilter, it's not all bad. A lot bad, yes, but not all. So we're going to explore what we mean by that, and Leona's going to share.
Well, this picture says it all. Because like all of you, the stay-at-home order, the constant barrage of sad and overwhelming broadcasts, the isolation, the no end in sight reality, well, it was a little bit overwhelming. We ached to hear good news about an ending, but none came. And it became painfully aware that we were betwixt and between what we had known and what was coming. During this time, I read a fascinating devotional written by Father Richard Rohr entitled Liminal Space. And it was based on the Latin word limen, or threshold. He maintained this uncomfortable season is, quote, where we must leave business as usual and enter a world where the rules and expectations are quite different. In such space, he says, we are not certain or in control. And he admonishes us to embrace the betwixt and between period with patience, silence, humility, and hope. And then he says this, and you see it on the screen, it is a graced time. He says we need to be silent instead of speaking, experience emptiness instead of fullness, anonymity instead of persona, and pennilessness instead of plenty. Well, the pandemic forced our lives into an unplanned, and I might add uninvited, interlude, like a pause between two pieces of music. We had to be quiet. We had to reflect and search our hearts and the scriptures to find God. The pandemic had attacked every foundation of our lives. Everything that gave structure, consistency, and meaning was fragmented and uncertain. Family? Nope. Grandparenting visits and hugs? Nope. Church? No. Work? No. Shopping? Nope. Well, maybe, just maybe, betwixt and between isn't all so bad. We adopted a new mantra for 2020. Instead of 2020 vision, we decided on pivot. And we began asking if we could find new ways to do things. If restaurants could pivot from dine-in to takeout, there should be creative ways for us to pivot our lives and our activities to be more risk-free and safe and still be effective. So here's what we did. First, we decided we had to really maintain and improve our physical and our spiritual health. So we took daily walks. We ordered healthy foods to pick up from Safeway. We ate at home more with all good, healthy outcomes. We nourished our spiritual health with connecting through live streaming with our churches that we've been in around the country, which is rather exciting to see. And it was nourishing and surprisingly gratifying and inspiring. And then we dug deep into scripture, and I listed some verses there. I won't read them all, but the meat of each one of them was that God would be present and he would provide and he would lead us through this. And Isaiah 43:19, you have to remember, he said, for I'm about to do something new. And we really clung to that. Second pivot, we decided, well, there's got to be new ways to connect with our families and friends. So like many of you, We clung to technology, including Zoom and FaceTime and all that, and some good old online games like Fibbage and Scrabble Go. We learned how to socially distance some activities, including boat rides on the Puget Sound. And we helped our kids with their school at home experiences by teaching a couple classes in ventriloquism and journalism. And you know what? We prayed even more for our adult kids because they were experiencing some real significant trials and difficulties. Now, the third part of Pivot was our ministry. How are we going to creatively expand it? And this did not come easy because we like to be doing and productive and effective if we can be. We had to be still. We had to cancel all our events and travel and everything that seemed to give us purpose. And we'll talk more about purpose in just a few minutes. But eventually we did utilize technology, and we reached out to ministry peers and nonprofit organization leaders and church leaders and our fellow boomers. And in May, we had a chance to even lead a retreat, which is usually conducted at a retreat center or a church fellowship hall for a weekend. Instead, we did it for 4 weeks, 2 hours a week. It took more time and it took more creativity, but we learned that we had to pivot our ministry. And we really did take some time to dig deeper into research and reading and learning from webinars and writings and discussions in both the field of aging and in ministry. Basically, like this poor guy hanging there, we were just trying to find peace and purpose in the betwixt and between. And to be honest, we didn't really anticipate how long we'd have to hang in that uncomfortable position. But Richard, teach us a little bit about that disruption.
Thank you, Leona. You know, in July of 2020, Dr. Ken Dykewald and Robert Morrison published their book, What Retirees Want, a holistic view of life's third age. And the summary says that in the past decades, retirement was often viewed as a gradual decline and financial contraction. But thanks to increased lifespans and better health care, today's retirees, particularly baby boomers, are experiencing a distinct and rewarding phase of life, ready to explore new activities, new meanings, and new opportunities. That was in January of 2020, you can imagine. Now, Ken Dykewald has been the leading voice in understanding and marketing to the baby boomers for 40 years since publishing his book, Age Wave, which is the same name as his business. And as usual, he paints an optimistic and visionary picture of the road ahead for the boomer generation. But ironically, the book was released to the publisher in mid-January 2020, just as the novella coronavirus was gaining a foothold in the United States. An added note in the introduction acknowledged that in light of the pandemic, everything about our lives is disrupted in the short term and perhaps the long term as well. You know, as I read Dykewald's book, I found myself in what seemed like an alternative universe from the one that he was writing about, which is not to take away from his credibility or the content of the book. It's just that none of us saw this pandemic coming. The images of baby boomer retirees living out the good life, forever young, if you will, and ready for the next adventure seemed like a world away in the midst of this disruptive pandemic. There's a song by the Rolling Stones that says, "You can't always get what you want." And that seems like an important qualifier to the title, What Retirees Want. The sad truth is that none of us are getting what we wanted or what we expected out of this stage of our lives. Whether you were planning your next travel adventure, volunteering for your favorite nonprofit, attending a Major League Baseball game, or simply enjoying a night out for dinner and to theater, COVID-19 has robbed all of us of life's simplest pleasures. As Leona mentioned, we had hoped to go to Italy in 2020, using our air miles and spend time with our grandchildren, look in our aging mothers in Montana and Colorado, attend church, meet up with friends, go out to eat. But notably, there's a second line in that song that says, "But if you try some time, you might just find you get what you need. That song was written in 1969, at the end of the 60s, the tumultuous 60s, and it paints a contrasting view between what we desire and what we actually need. So the underlying tone is actually somewhat optimistic. We've thought that we needed all those things on our want list, but we've also found that we can live without them. So what are our needs during these uncertain times? Well, you know, following the book's publication, Ken Dykewald and his company, AgeWave, partnered with Edward Jones Financial and the Harris Poll to conduct a nationwide survey to pinpoint the needs of today's retirees. The resulting report, called The 4 Pillars of the New Retirement, is an exceptional report, and we're going to post that on the website for you and in the chat. But it identifies the primary needs of today's retirees. And they are health, family, purpose, and finances. So recognizing and focusing on these 4 pillars may be the key, the report says, to adjusting to retired life in today's new normal. So health is essential or foundational, they say, to all other aspects of retirement. There's a lot more detail in the report. I encourage you to look at it. Family is the second pillar, and it says retirees consistently say family is their greatest source of satisfaction, support, joy, and even purpose. And then purpose stands alone as its own pillar here, which I think is interesting for our discussion today. It says retirees with a strong sense of purpose are happier, healthier, more active, and socially engaged, and they live longer. So we find it significant for our conversation today that the report identified the need for a sense of purpose as one of these 4 pillars. In fact, it may be the most important of the 4 pillars, or even foundational to the other 3. As Mark Friedman, CEO of Encore, suggests in this report, purpose is feeling like the world needs you as much as you need it. And that you have something to contribute and that you still matter. That's Mark Friedman of encore.org. The report goes on to suggest that purpose takes different forms, but the most important include these 3 elements: giving, or finding ways to contribute to the community and put knowledge, skill, and experience to work, making a difference in the lives of others; growing, or trying new things, developing new abilities, meeting personal goals, intellectual, artistic, and athletic; or deepening spirituality and a sense of self. And then enjoying, or spending time alone or with family and friends, doing things that provide meaning and pleasure, recreation, hobbies, work, travel, entertainment, and get-togethers. Now, to give full credit to the report, this is at edwardjones.com, New Retirement. And so much of what I'm reflecting here is from that report. The important thing for retirees is to have a strong sense of purpose, activities to anticipate, and energizing reasons to get out of bed in the morning and give meaning to each day. For a number of years, as we've done retreats around the country, in fact, we've said, you know, if you have a pulse, you have a purpose. But that has seemed rather trivial in light of these pandemic days. The fact is, today's retirees have a good deal of leisure time on their hands, and that they can use that to either indulge themselves, watching an average of 48 hours of TV a week, or they can invest their days in giving back to others by volunteering in their communities. Here's an interesting slide that really captures how it is that today's people in the third of life or retirement find personal sources of purpose, meaning, and fulfillment. You can see on the graph, which is from the report, spending time with loved ones is right there at the top of the list. And how disappointing it is to all of us to be robbed of so much of that. We have 6 grandchildren, and it's very painful to not be with them, hugging them, even though we found some creative ways outdoors to socially distance and get together. Doing interesting and enjoyable things, being generous or giving back, living a faith-filled life, just barely edged out living a fun-filled life by 2 percentage points, but fulfilling life's goals and being financially wealthy. And while COVID-19 has diminished the opportunities for many due to the stay-at-home orders and lockdowns, many have found added purpose in helping others during this time of need, including by supporting the well-being of family and friends. The report goes on to say, grandparents have been pressed into childcare, and healthcare professionals have come out of retirement to lend such a need. Now, for us as Christ followers, our purpose is deeply rooted in our faith and in our relationship with Christ. I think we of all people have a reason to find purpose in the midst of all that is going on around us. And for that comes from knowing who we are, or our identity, primarily found in Christ and in a relationship to him, but also where we've come from, our history, a time to do maybe some reflection, some journaling, some life review, understanding how God has been at work in our past and recognizing that we still have a future. I found this very helpful in my own life to periodically, throughout different stages of my life, do some intense and serious life review. And then where we are going, understanding our vision, the vision for our future, which is very diminished right now. It's hard to see where the future is. We live on the Puget Sound, and periodically over the summer, the skies have been filled with smoke, and more recently with fog, to where we can't even see an island just a short distance away from us. But hopefully this fog is going to lift, and our vision is going to be restored to where we can see possibilities in the days ahead. I think of the Apostle Paul and his life purpose as found in Ephesians 3, verses 1 through 14, where he talks about his identity, his history, and his purpose, his vision in life, summarized in this phrase, to know Christ and the power of his resurrection. Those of us who truly understand our purpose can help others to find their purpose as well, not merely in the temporal things of this world, but in the eternal purposes that God has for us and for the world. So in summary, although we may not get everything we want in the third of life or retirement during these times, that Rolling Stones song reminds us that if we try sometime, we might just find we'll get what we need. We need our health to sustain us and undergird us. We need our families to support us, for us to support them, our purpose to define us and motivate us, and then our finances to undergird us. So before we move on, there's just some questions for you to reflect on. What gave you a sense of purpose in the opening days of 2020? What did you lose, or what has been disrupted? And how have you needed to adjust or pivot? Leona?
Well, how are we going to reconstruct this sense of purpose in the midst of all that's going on in the world? We want to suggest 6 principles. Now, this is no formula, this is no magic potion, but perhaps these principles will capture for you, as it has for us, a process for adjusting to the realities imposed upon us by the events of 2020. And because Richard is a pastor and a preacher, all of these principles start with the same letter, and you'll be able to remember them better that way. They all start with A. So the first principle to reconstructing our purpose is to accept this slowdown as a gift. Now, as the pandemic accelerated and our governor issued stay-at-home orders in March, we found ourselves restricted to our house with nowhere to go. And even now, 6 months later, our state and county are in phases that restrict many activities and gatherings. But we recognized it was imperative that we accept this time as a gift and appreciate being able to base our ministry from home and work remotely. Now, accepting discomfort and seeing it as a gift is not easy, but we are inspired by many people in our lives Our own mothers, both in their 90s, have been isolated in their senior living residences for all these months. And they've demonstrated attitudes of acceptance and, may I say, even gratitude. They're thankful daily for their safety and their provisions in life itself. And we've learned a lot from watching that level of acceptance. We also learn from our grandchildren who are adapting to remote learning situations rather than being in real life school. They've set up their learning stations and they have their little headphones and raceable markers on their whiteboards with their schedules, and they've accepted it, not always happily, but gratefully for interaction and learning. And as my granddaughter said the other day, and for the instruction. So we learn from them. We've been impressed with church leaders and the way they've adapted services and created ways to support their parishioners. And daily, we really do find wisdom in that serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Accepting this slowdown as a gift is critical. Again, quoting Margie Worrell, she said this, quote, "The gift of this crisis is that it has pulled us, albeit shockingly, out of the hurly-burly of our lives. It simultaneously gifted us with precious time to pause, recalibrate our ideas of success and what it means to live a meaningful life. So 1, accept the slowdown as a gift. 2, I think we need to acknowledge the things we have lost. Every single one of us has experienced loss during this pandemic, and it hurts. As we move forward, we need to acknowledge the impact that grief has on our life. David Kessler, who's an expert on grief and was the co-author with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in that iconic work on grief and grieving, reminds us. He says this heavy feeling we often experience in our hearts and our lungs, it's grief. He said the world has died. He said each of our worlds has died in some way or another. So we've got to give ourselves some permission to acknowledge and grieve the losses. Some of us have actually lost loved ones to this horrible virus. Many of us have given up gathering with families and friends. Many are suffering from financial distress and unemployment. And some of us are just grieving the loss of normal activity. It's clear, individually and together, we are suffering. But Kessler also reminds us that there's another stage of grief, and he calls it meaning. It's transforming grief into meaning or moving into a more peaceful and hopeful existence. And part of what we hope we can do today in this webinar is just encourage you to continue this journey one step at a time, acknowledge and grieve the losses. And this might take some time and intentional reflection. But as we move on, we need to look at new ways to reinvest our lives, to integrate the pain into the entire story of our lives that God is meticulously weaving. We need to repair the damage, reconstruct the foundation of our lives, and reignite our purpose and calling. And you know what? Eventually, we can expand our focus and mission to serve the next generations, those in need and those in pain. We will need to transform grief into meaning and experience the power of purpose. Third, affirm those things that you value. Now, in grieving, we do become acutely aware of what really matters to us. And so defining one's values is basic to understanding purpose. And if you're truly to experience the power of purpose, even in a time of pandemic, you've got to affirm and celebrate those things that matter most to you, those things that you cherish. And may I again quote Margie Worrell. She says, quote, "Living purposely requires constantly resetting our attention on the things that matter most." Yet, ironically enough, the things that matter most are rarely seen. They're the values upon which we build our lives. They are the attributes of the person we aspire to be. They are the mark that in our heart of hearts, we feel most called to make. So for us, we affirmed that relationships were high on our value list, whether with family or with friends. We valued our faith and gathering with our community of faith. We valued our health and safety, so we took some extreme measures to limit our exposure to people. We spend a lot of time in nature and enjoy the Pacific Northwest, our beaches and our mountains and our forests. So as you think about affirming, what bubbles to the surface for you as you understand your true values? So there's 3 more A's for Richard to cover.
Well, 3 more. The fourth A is ask. Ask yourself, okay, what's truly important right now? What do I need to focus on that reflects my purpose? We recently helped a family member clear out a lifetime of possessions after 80 years when he had to move into assisted living. And it was very enlightening to watch all of these possessions either taken to a dumpster, to recycling, to a thrift store, or to an auction house. And it just pressed home for us the futility of life's possessions and accumulating things when all of it basically went back in the box. We decided that the same could apply to our lives, that we needed to downsize certain things during this pandemic. Maybe it's time to downsize some of the activities of our lives in order to be able to concentrate our time and energy on the things that matter. So ask yourself, what's truly important right now? What are your priorities? And then adjust to the new realities. As Leona said earlier, we've had to pivot to new limitations on gathering and events. We learned how to host Zoom events, to upgrade to Zoom Pro, not limited by time or attendees. And we even did that Reignite retreat remotely. We launched a free monthly webinar series last month, and this is actually the second webinar that we've done, sponsored by Pree. Churches have switched to streaming services and only now are beginning to regather with COVID-19 restrictions slightly being lifted. One of our favorite stories of adjusting is the Canlis restaurant in Seattle, which is probably the most famous fine dining restaurant in the whole Northwest. And the owners of that, Mark and Brian Canlis, had to pivot immediately and began, instead of fine dining indoors, they had a burger joint, delivery to homes, and later this summer had a crab shack in the parking lot. But now this fall have shifted completely to where they've launched Canlis Community College, an online menu of various classes. They've adjusted to the new realities of indoor dining and fine dining in a restaurant. All of these businesses that have had to pivot are an example of the need for creativity, flexibility, and adaptability. And then also, we want to encourage you to not let go of your dreams and to advance those goals that are still relevant to you. We still hope that perhaps we could cash in those air miles and travel again. Maybe not to Europe very soon, but somewhere off in the distance. We've recently figured out how to have our grandchildren visit us again, as we mentioned. We can take a ride on the ferry across the Puget Sound. We can perhaps drive with the car windows open, play outside here in front of our home. And we're even thinking about writing another book that would address the challenges of living through these difficult times. So these are all just, again, not a formula, but as we've reflected upon the things that are important, the processes that we've gone through, maybe they will encourage you during this time. So Leona, why don't you put a wrap on this and conclude our thoughts for the day.
How will you rediscover the power of purpose, even in this pandemic? This pandemic's turned our world on its axis and stolen so much from all of us. We'd love to hear your stories of how you've accepted and adapted and advanced your goals. We would really love to hear those stories. We hope that in this webinar, we've been able to show you a sense of purpose is critical to our ability to survive the challenges we face in these times. In this season of life, just normally, we need a sense of purpose in order to fulfill all that God has called us to be and do. But in these times, even more so. So whether it's being a tutor to your grandchildren, or a mentor to the younger generations, or volunteering time and talents wherever the world may need you, we can find ways to give back and carry on. We can be a generation that follows our calling, our third calling, as it were. We can lead with confidence. We can adapt with grace. We can leave a legacy of resilience, and we can model hope. So this ends our official presentation, but Dr. Roberts, you had some questions and wanted to talk with our participants.
Yes. So, first of all, thank you. That's just very encouraging in many different ways. And I have some of my own questions. If any of you folks have questions, you can go into the Q&A part of Zoom and actually put your questions in there. You're welcome to do that. But the first thing that really strikes me is that throughout your talk, you're very open about and aware of just the losses in this season of life. And I at least was raised in a family and a culture that wasn't very open to acknowledging loss and sadness. And, you know, we just always tried to think on the bright side. What is it that helps you to be able to be honest about those disappointments with yourself and with each other? What gives you that, or helps you have that kind of freedom?
Well, you know, just off the top of my head, I think about that book, Good to Great, where the author talks about facing the brutal facts. And the brutal facts of this pandemic are that people are getting sick, people are dying. We've lost a lot of opportunities in the world. Facing that and then just embracing that reality, for me, I guess some days are more difficult than others to really keep that spark alive and keep hope alive and vision for the future. But it's no time to be in denial. We have to be careful. We have to talk about reality and deal with what has been handed us in this world in which we live right now. Leona, any thoughts?
Well, you churchmen will remember the book and the author, and I can't remember it at the moment, but a long time ago when we were studying churches, there was this illustration of new wine, and that we weren't to be in community like billiard balls hitting off each other and being tough, and we were to be more like grapes and connecting and mushing and making a new wine. And to me, it's not easy to be honest about the pain, but when you do, you mush together with your community of faith, and you realize that everybody's hurting. Everybody is impacted by this in one way or another, some more drastic than others. But that's our common base, and that's where the good news comes in, is it heals that, it brings us together as community. So I'm a little more mushy than Richard.
Well, that's great. I think you're referring to the book, The Taste of New Wine by Keith Miller.
Yes, I am.
And
thank you.
You don't know that Keith Miller was the director, the first director of Laity Lodge, where I actually worked for a while. And in his when in his 80s, he and I became good friends, and he was such an encourager of community. That seems to be a really important piece of being able to acknowledge what's hard, is having people with whom to share it, and places where we can be open and honest, and where it's okay to be disappointed or sad or or whatever. I mean, it does sound like even in this pandemic, I mean, obviously you have the two of you, but you must have others with whom you're sharing life, both the good things, but also the hard things. How do you do that? I'm just curious, like, how do you share in relationship these days?
On Zoom.
Yeah, a lot of Zoom.
Yeah, it's harder. That's pretty much it. On Zoom.
Yeah, we've reached
Periodic.
out to a number of colleagues and
Mhm.
peers, especially early on in this pandemic. I think we were all motivated to connect and find community. That has subsided somewhat. I think some of the enamorment with Zoom has worn a bit thin for folks. We all get more Zoom time than perhaps, especially our grandchildren. But yeah, we've had a great time reaching out to our grandchildren, even in teaching classes with them on Zoom to supplement what they were doing in the school.
We do spend a lot of time in nature, and we have a reserve close by that we take a 2-mile walk on. And we have been able to have friends walk on that with us. And there's something about nature and beaches or the woods that makes us all, I don't know, children of God and in his creation.
Well, it certainly helps. And as you know, increasingly the scientific evidence is that if you are carefully distanced and outside, that's really pretty safe. There's in fact, there's a fascinating, I don't have the link right, but there's a fascinating interview recently of a epidemiologist from Harvard who was studying this stuff. And she one of the things she pointed out is that you're 20 times more likely to get the coronavirus inside than outside. And so she was strongly encouraging kind of the thing you just mentioned. You can be with people, but make sure you're distanced and be outside. Now, that it's going to be a little tougher in the winter in some parts of our country, but it's still a really important encouragement she was saying it's really important for us to pay attention to our social needs, even as we are taking very seriously the need to socially distance and be careful and wise in the pandemic. So I just found that to be an encouragement to be creative, because as you said, I mean, part of what enables us to carry on and deal with the losses and the disappointments is the community we have around us, and that's good. Before we sign off, we'll sign off just here in a couple minutes. I'd like to give you an opportunity, if you'd like to say just a few words about, you have a couple of books up on your website, and I'd love for folk to know just real briefly what those are about in case they're interested, because I've seen them and I think they're worthwhile. So do you want to say a word or two about each of your books?
Go ahead, Leona.
Well, we have Third Calling, What Are You Doing the Rest of Your Life? And that was just a really important book for us to write, to be able to share our conviction that God isn't done with us at a certain age. And then in fact, he spent a good deal of time building into us skills and values and talents and personality and all those things that make us us. And it would not be appropriate for us to just quit serving and quit serving him, quit serving the next generations. In fact, it would be very disobedient. So part of our hope in Third Calling is just to encourage our peers to realize that there may be even a whole new thing to do in a whole new season of life. And it's no time for us to just sit and watch television. So that's our main book. We followed that up with a study guide that we have encouraged small groups to use. And that's been, we kind of rearranged it so it's according more to theme. It doesn't just go chapter, 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 but theme of Third Calling. And we've seen actually the people that have benefited the most from what we've heard, people sometimes tell you, are younger people, people in their 50s that are thinking about, ooh, what's that going to look like in that? Is there still something worthwhile for me to do? Last year,
yeah, go ahead.
Well, last year we just put it all together rather graphically in a personal journal that we actually used the retirement word. It's the first time we've ever actually used that word in a title, but it's called Life After Work. And it goes through just, it's a journal, opportunities to self-reflect and to write answers to questions. And it's very colorful. It's a very fun retirement gift for one thing, but we found that to be a fun tool for people. 10 years ago, we put together a movie called Musical Chairs, which is a DVD that challenges the stereotypes of retirement. Have we done anything else?
Well, 20 years ago, we actually self-published a book on senior adult programming in the local church called Amazing Grays, Unleashing the Power of Age in Your Congregation. And we did some seminars around the country, and that led to an opportunity nationally with our denomination and locally in a local church to lead second half ministries. But as this boomer wave has crested upon society and the culture, we found that we needed to take a more personal approach to addressing the needs and aspirations of the boomer generation, which is why we wrote Third Calling. What are you doing the rest of your life? And there's a great story behind that song. It's a Barbara Streisand song. And Leona didn't get a chance to tell that whole story today, but it's a fun story about our engagement. It's in the book.
But the Reignite retreats have really been our signature event. And we did tape it all before all this pandemic, interestingly, and put it online as an online course. So you can go to the retreat on your own. And we do miss those. We miss those interactions with people. But
Well, thanks for filling us in. I just want to make sure folks know some of what you folks have put together. And as you just mentioned, you've really been at this for a long time. You were serving folk in the second half, which included the third. And, I so appreciate the wisdom and the foresight and the resources you have together. As we wrap up, let me say, by the way, I put in the chat the link to that, the podcast I mentioned, the Harvard epidemiologist. I thought it was a fascinating, really smart person up on the science talking about it in a way that was really helpful. And, as most of us know, there actually been some encouraging stories out this week about treatments for coronavirus and vaccines that are coming. And it kind of looks like we've got a good 6 months left. And, that's better than 1 year or 2 years. But anyway, I put that up in case you're interested in that. And we've got the links to Reignite and different materials there. So if just for you as you're watching this, you might find those to be very helpful. I'd certainly recommend them. Also, as Leona mentioned, community matters. And if you've got some folks you can work through this material with, some folks in your church, your friendship group, your, book club, whatever it is, there are lots of opportunities and places. It really does seem like we need to be working through this together. And Richard and Leona, we don't get to be your friends in the ordinary way, but your example and open-heartedness and wisdom really helps. And thank you for thinking us through. Yeah, the link to the epidemiologist, can I send it? I think we can send stuff email out, but it's in the chat. If you go up just a little bit, I put it in there so you can find it. But otherwise, I think I'd like to just, if I may, close in a word of prayer, and then we will sign off. Richard and Leona, anything else you want to add before I pray?
No, just thanks so much for having us, and it's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you. It's great, and you've been, it's really, as we in the Pree Center are really getting going with our third work. You have been both great encouragers and now great contributors and partners. So thank you for that. So let me pray briefly, and then we'll be done. So gracious God, thank you for this time. Thank you for Richard and Leona for their wisdom and their vision. Thanks for their willingness to share this with us today. Thanks for the things they've written and the things they've done. Continue, we pray, to bless their work. And Lord, help us as we are in or transitioning in the third of life to discover purpose that comes from you. May we live for your praise and your glory in all that we do, as we are guided by you and filled with your spirit and part of your community. So again, we thank you for this time that we've had together today. And we pray all this in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Blessings to you all.